you want a license, here's where you come to get one.
Which increases transaction costs then. If it's one click, you get it. Transaction costs go really quite down, it just happens. To then begin to factor in the exceptions and the permitted uses, whatever jurisdiction they may be, then that's going to build up the transaction. And particularly if it hits America.
The price of an exception is the cost of obtaining the information that such a thing exists.
Yeah.
An exception does have a price.
Yeah.
It just occurs to me right now. There's a transaction cost in using quotation exception, and it just became more significant in the UK because now the transaction cost could be as high as £1 million to find out what new law means. That's what the cost to go to the CJEU to find out what the new quotation exception is about, and that's a problem with exceptions in general.
So plugging that back into your analysis, one way of reducing transaction costs is to get rid of all exceptions. And just have everything licensable paid to one person. And then you would have transaction costs of practically zero.
But this would create lots of other costs.
I remember what my other question was. It was a point I think I omitted from my presentation, but it's a question for you as well. Do you think that the contracts that individuals consent to when they submit content, whether it be in commenting on an article in Paith or uploading a photo to next big thing, whatever comes after Twitter, do they need to be regulated? Because we've already come across with the Morale case, Agence France Presse using a version of the TwitPics user contract that appears to be in effect for only about 3 weeks, using that as a defence against Daniel Morale's infringement of Daniel Morale's speeches. Do these contracts need to be regulated?
I would think so. In fact, in the case of Spanish law, I would like to have a special or a group of special provisions dealing with those issues, because I think the current regulation on civil contracts or private contracts and also consumer contracts does not really fit with most of the it's not really adequate for most of the problems that may be involved in audience submitted content, and also freelancers and other professional content within a project. Especially in the case of freelancers or advertisers and so on, there have been many problems in establishing who has the rights in Spain, and what happens with remuneration and the problem of windfalls that you mentioned before. And so that I would like to have more clear rules in order to avoid uncertainty and in order to avoid litigation.
Just reminded, it's actually the question of the contracts goes, it spreads out as far as you like. If you're ever at Brussels Midi and you want to use the Wi-Fi, be careful, because the free Wi-Fi obliges you to indemnify the Wi-Fi provider against all legal actions.
Yeah.
I read 6,000 words of contract because I was bored. No one else does.
I think that in this particular case, or using a Wi-Fi system, you are a user and you can, and this provision would be null, because I think it would be like an abuse of right or an unfair term. But when you're a citizen reading a newspaper and you're submitting content, the fact there is some sort of consideration between the audience and the platform or the newspaper or whatever, I think that this poses a risk as to what extent unfair contract terms, regulations can be applied or not. And because of that, in order to avoid this uncertainty, in order to avoid this risk, I would like to have a clear rule on what happens with when someone who is a citizen, who is not really a professional, licenses or assigns rights. Can we understand that he is a consumer, he's a user in the terms of the unfair term directive, in the terms of the unfair terms regulations in Spain? Because of that, I would like to have more clear rules on those issues.
I have a couple of very short and simple questions. One is about terms. You have talked about audience submitted content. Is any difference with the most whether you use user-generated content?
No, I have used the two categories interchangeably.
Okay. The other one is probably the Canadian law was being reformed a couple of years ago. It's the only one in the world, or the Western world I know, that introduces the question of the user-generated content author's rights. Well, the question is simple. I don't know if the answer could be as short as it is. Is the Canadian law doing it well? Is this a model for Europe, for example?
Mm-hmm. Oh, to be honest, I do not know all the details of the regulation, so I'm not sure if my answer would be correct or not. I think it can be used as a model for new regulation, but nonetheless, the general rules on copyright law. So norms on assigning initial entitlements, initial copyright ownership, I think are more than enough to cover those issues. The topics or the matters that I think need to be reworked in Europe are the rules that affect assigning, affect transfers, affect derivative ownership.
There was another question on that. Who's the one that is entitled to commercialize the derivative works and services, especially of the works produced by the audience? I mean, most of the derivative works come from the fan fiction. I mean, people that lengthen the end or change the end of a chapter or create new characteristics for minor characters on. When they are not doing it for profit. When you're doing that, George Lucas will come, George Lucas lawyers will come, and they will say, stop, immediately, this one. But this happened in a world in which derivative works created by the audience is an increasing economic value. Who is the one who is entitled, which is the tension amongst the organizations, which is the lobbying activity of them. Say, okay, derivative works of the audience can be important, so let's take a look on that. Let's try to control that.
Just to add on that, I mean, that's a really interesting point from the point of view of the development of literature and the interface between the development of literature, for example, and intellectual property. And it can be a real fetter if you extend that far too far to allow people to claim such extensive rights over derivative content, because in one sense, the book 50 Shades of Grey is fan fiction on the Twilight. On the other hand, Isaac Newton famously said he was standing on the shoulders of giants. In other words, his work was derivative from and predicated on the works of others. So this is there are tensions here between the desire to maximize the potential revenue from a product and to get your incentive, reward, whatever rationale you're going to use for it, and the extent to which a derivative product actually changes and adds value to society in a different way. That wasn't an answer, that was restating your question.
It's a very good answer, in my opinion. This might be one of the major concerns of the newspaper industry. Okay, we have the exclusive rights upon the works produced by our freelance or work made for hired journalists, but we don't really know what to do with the people's contributions. So, okay, we don't have, to this point, the exclusive right, but let's think about that. Just in case it becomes important, think about that, because they don't have a contract, they don't have an agreement, they just agree the terms of condition of the newspaper when they enter the website. So maybe it can be a controversial discussion in the future.
Yeah, I think it's a really controversial issue, and in fact, a risk that lawyers have to take into account when advising online platforms, when advising newspapers and other and other media. And because of that, I would like to have more tools in Spanish law and also maybe within Europe as well, especially for the transfers of rights, especially for the assignment of rights.
Yeah.
As to what extent a private ordering of contracts may be used to avoid future opportunistic behaviors or anticipated risks. At the end of the day, we can apply, if you want, a traditional solution that is going back to sharecropping contracts. I'm a private legal scholar, so sometimes I have to explain to my students traditional contracts in agriculture, and sharecropping contracts in Spanish law or in Catalan law may be a solution for that. So the user that submits content is using a platform, using a land that is owned by the platform, the online platform, and maybe they have to split gains.
And yet that's an absolutely valid analysis, but there are dangers of going too much down the private law analysis, because the material we're talking about isn't agricultural product. It's the lifeblood of a democracy. And so, although copyright isn't very good at doing this, we are heading straight towards Article 10 considerations of both the right to speak, but also the public's right to know. I don't know what it's like in Spain, but in England, the boundary between those, the courts have begun to realise that Article 10 is engaged, but they generally are hesitant in saying that it trumps intellectual property. But it is a real issue here. If you allow over control of the facts, which are required in a healthy democracy, if you allow over control, there are going to be, to use your phrase, there are going to be democratic costs. You're looking perplexed at that proposal.
Information wants to be free. It wants to be free as the birds of the air, but they also need to eat. Information does not want to be free as in beer. So I want to talk always about unhindered access to information. And if it is found that Radio Elsevier Scientific Journals division is overcharging, then
There's an agreement on that recently, a secret agreement between the French government and Elsevier. It has been published right now. I've received an email saying, well, the secret agreement is available on the internet, translated into English. So you can read that. And as a conclusion, they say, well, authors are paying twice for seeing published their work. This is the final conclusion. How
Yes.
do you repeat that?
Yes, maybe, but you are referring to the case of when an author pays to publish.
I'm referring to this. I've received an email, so hi everyone, this is our message to highlight a piece we wrote with Carl Anglais. It was published in a prominent online publication yesterday in French and was aimed to release the recently concluded agreement between the French Ministry of Research and Elsevier.
This is normal.
Such secret contracts are what hinders any meaningful incentive to an open access policy. This is the first installment in a series of materials we will be running in the coming weeks, aiming to achieve greater transparency and later on to conquer the world. And the piece of information says it's published by Open Knowledge Foundation blog and by an online French company, V89, and it says France prefers to pay twice for paper by its researchers. They're paying twice. Secret agreement.
Publishing is a problem, but the other side is that there's a problem. I get a small but steady income from writing up the effects of rogue open access publishing. There appear to be more scammers out there than there are public Library of Science. The whole thing is in flux. But what I was saying is if they're overcharging, that's not a question about authors' rights. If they're demanding, to demand assignment of the author's rights, they take away the right of integrity. And what does an academic have but their integrity in the market? But it's not a question about authors' rights, it's a question about their abuse of a dominant position.
Going back to your metaphor about the birds, I mean, it's absolutely right, but it is engaged, this tension. There is a real tension here. I mean, there's a category difference between the product of newspapers and news and making ice cream. Famously, Mark Fowler, who was the Reagan era head of the FCC, said television is no different to any other commodity, it's just a toaster with pictures. And he was wrong. There is something relevant going on here, and even if it is, which it is the case, the birds of the air need to be fed. So even if the risk is that money is necessarily, and I agree with you, involved in the distribution of information, the over-assertion of the need for remuneration of money is going to be a fetter on free discourse, particularly of facts as opposed to the expression of facts. So we come back to it. There are tensions here. Article 10 is involved and can be involved in certain cases. And
Yeah, for sure.
this is a problem. So one needs to avoid only looking at this as an economic question. One needs to look at it as a democratic question as well, which is difficult.
I was thinking of I was very much disappointed. The organisation, Article 19, produced a critique of authors' rights, which favoured the interests of a certain California corporation, which happens to have sponsored several of the people who contributed to the report. But there's your thing for lobbying. Journalist anecdote, I was just meeting with about 5 years ago with the then UK minister. At the end, I said, "Will the person representing Google please raise their hand?" And 3 librarians looked at their shoes. But no one raised their hand. They're very effective at lobbying through others. But Article 19's approach was deeply disappointing and intellectually.
Well, it cuts both ways. Having laid out the argument that there is Article 10 is definitely involved. I mean, the counter argument is that Article 10 can be involved, can be prayed at aid of the intellectual property argument.
Precisely. If I am starving, then journalism is diminished by my tiny contribution.
And then you get the counter argument, which I've also heard. Well, we come back to creative destruction, which is a lot of this stuff, especially the generation of news, is being generated without those old-fashioned institutions which paid paid pensions, which had large, big statement of buildings. A lot of this stuff is generated anyway. So a lot of the stuff, for example, the Arab Spring was generated on Twitter by individuals who were there, who created a newsfeed which is better than the others. There are levels of engagement of Article 10 and the extensions. But the underlying point of all of this is it's not what we're producing here is not crisps or ice cream. It's something which engages other fundamental rights. So
I just thought of an analysis of the citizen journalism phenomenon. There's a massive, what you could metaphorically call a transaction cost in Twitter, which is that every reader has to apply the skepticism that the embittered old sub-editor on the back bench would have applied to the outpourings of the bright young journalists. Every citizen is now forced to be that man in a cardigan having a heart attack over the distortion of the facts, which is the stereotype of the sub-editor. Now everybody
then you
has to look at everything they read and unfiltered and decide whether it's completely mad.
But taking that point and taking it on a bit, there is, funny enough, there's a value to that, a media literacy value to that. If people are beginning to be more skeptic about the information flow from being exposed to potential propaganda on Twitter, that's not necessarily a bad. It's an increased transaction cost, but it's also, from media literacy point of view, an improvement. So it cuts both ways. But I'm not providing any answers to your question. You're seeking a synthesis here. I'm just opening another field of confusion.
The most interesting questions are those that are open, because it's a challenge for us as researchers to try to give an approach to an answer. Okay, so we're coming to an end, but I wanted to do a very general summary and pose the great questions of it. I think that Dr. Danbury has provided with a headline with what is worth protecting. And I should add, is it in favor of encouraging learning, as the Statute of Anne said, or is it in favor of the booksellers then in 1710 and of newspaper editors right now. And this is a question of democracy as well. This is the very good question. It has to do with democracy. Information wants to be free, as Mike Holder has underlined. Information wants to be free, but authors need to make a living out of his efforts. So let's try to make a balance. The balance is not between the industry only and the general public only, because even though the general audience is becoming an author and can be an author or group, organized or not, that claims for compensation. This is another great concept posed here. There are some questions I prefer you to pose them, but if not, I can undercover some of the concerns posed by you and questions of my colleagues and students. For example, a great question is that of metadata, and if we are in front of a disruptive technology and in front of a disruption of society, in fact, and especially of the news industry as we knew until now, is it the end of the world as we knew it, or is it not? What happens if it is? Okay. What about the trends? Does copyright tax, and especially those powers devoted to news, need to be unified in Europe, for example? Do we need the European Union to say something about the real unification of the copyright laws in Europe? Is there any concern in the European Union? Is there any concern in Brussels about that, or do they prefer to remain silent on the whole thing and wait and see? Are moral rights important for journalists, not just because they preserve the integrity and the paternity of their work, but because they are important, but because as a core nucleus of untouchable and unwaivable rights have an economic importance as well, because they can give the journalists and their associations the force they need to negotiate with dominant actors in the news panorama. The question of exclusive rights, the question that have been posed about collective work, collaborative works, derivative works, and its increasing economic importance. And also to undercover the lobbying activity of both the newspaper industry in Europe and all over the world, and of the journalists as individuals, or the journalists altogether in trade union and associations. Well, there are some questions I like to place here, just in case someone of you want to discuss or shed some light on these questions. The great questions.
The lobbying is interesting. I mean, all of it's interesting. I don't want to just say, pick out and exclude everything else. The lobbying is interesting because of the nexus between old-fashioned publishers, particularly newspapers, and power. And it's interesting to see here you say that, which is why I was asking about the political nature of the arguments about Article 32. Interesting to hear you say it was the Spanish publishers managed to achieve something which was unexpected. I think the same probably is true of the German publishers as well. And you begin to wonder whether the force of power is that politicians in a democracy depend upon mediated communication for success, for power, to get their message through, and therefore they are trimming towards the giving benefits towards the publishers. I mean, that's the obvious thesis, that there's something pretty unpleasant going on here to do with covert, not transparent political pressure. I wonder how you'd empirically prove that. I mean, obviously you'd have to talk to people in corridors and smoke-filled rooms, but that might be difficult. It's just something briefly other to throw in there in your list of questions, which we haven't covered, is that a lot of the interventions which I'm looking at here are caused by print. And hardly any, in fact none I've seen, have been caused by old broadcast. And in fact, in the Belgian case, the broadcasters were quite happy to have their material collected by Google News. There's no sectoral difference here. It'd be interesting to know why. One theory is that the advertising market in broadcast has not collapsed, in that people still consider it, advertisers still consider it worth paying for broadcast spot ads, in a way that the advertising model for print has gone. That may be a reason, but it's interesting. There's a sectoral difference, an old-fashioned sectoral difference, because we all distribute on the screen now anyway. But there's an old-fashioned sectoral difference going on here, which is probably worth investigating. So when we're talking about publishers, we're primarily talking about print publishers, not old-fashioned broadcasters.
My suspicion is that it's technological, that as video streaming improves, as tools are developed to strip out the broadcaster's original ads and put in other ads, that YouTube's increasingly intrusive advertising, advertising to which you are enticed by a copy of a broadcaster's output, which may or may not be licensed, probably it'll catch up. It's just a question of bandwidth. As higher bandwidth becomes more widely available in the United States, the question will arise.
It's entirely plausible, isn't it? In which case you would see broadcasters joining this fight, as well as the print publishers. But it's retrospective interesting phenomenon. They haven't been.
My suspicion is that's
the other facet thrown in here is public service news as opposed to commercial news. Again, because when I was talking to people involved in Germany and Denmark, they were observing that the public service broadcasters, well, it is state-funded broadcasters as opposed to public service, because you can get commercial public service broadcasters like Channel 4 in England. But the state-funded broadcasters were not involved in this fight. You can obviously see why the state-funded broadcasters aren't involved, because they get their revenue from places other than advertising, so there's no need to impose a Google tax. But it is an interesting facet there. I mean, one of the things that results from that is that commercial broadcasters can't, as a union might do, withhold their product and say, unless Google they've got a very weak negotiating position, unless Google pay for us, we're not going to give it to you, because news is fungible. It doesn't matter if you can't get it from a commercial broadcaster, you can get it from a private, from a publicly funded broadcaster, or even from another country's broadcasters. So I'm just identifying different sections in this Google tax argument. You've got the commercial private, you've got the commercial public funded, as well as you've got the sectoral differences. So that was a speech, I didn't mean it to be. What's it like in Spain? Is there a developed public funded broadcaster or public funded print?
Public broadcasters exist, so we have the Spanish television and regional televisions as well. And the Spanish television or the Spanish broadcaster has no advertising revenues.
Decided by law.
Will they benefit from Article 32?
No, not yet. No, because Article 32 only applies to
what? Print.
To read individual works.
Yeah, to periodical works and blogs as well.
But I don't know about Spain, but in Britain, the BBC blog, and there's lots of written material. Do the Spanish broadcasters or the Spanish public service, do they blog?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So therefore they would benefit from this too.
Yeah.
Yeah. From the content posted on their websites.
Yeah.
So if you have a Spanish anchor who's blogging about something, or Spanish written.
But actually, no one of, as far as I know, at least, no one of the Spanish public broadcasting services, both the Spanish one or the regional one, has lobbied in favor of the so-called Google tax. It's in the Newspaper Editors Association.
But will they collect a check from the collecting society?
Blogs are affected, for example, because they don't mention Google. They mention aggregation news services. And this is an unwaivable right, which is very surprising. Is this right, is this legal, is this constitutional to determine that an economic right, an ancillary economic right is unwaivable?
So you're going to
One
get
of the moral rights.
But what we found in Germany is the same as I find in negotiations. If you can force someone to waive it, then the bigger party will force them to waive it. A waivable right is no right. The waivable right is not to sell
It's
necessarily.
personal right, and waivable is a personal one. You're the author, so you have to be recognized as an author. You need recognition. That's unwaivable.
Yes.
Or this personal right.
Except in the UK where it's waivable, and I'm not an author.
So there are inconsistent, there are unattractive consequences of making it waivable and unattractive consequences of making it unwaivable. The unattractive consequence of making it waivable is weak negotiation. The unattractive consequence of making it unwaivable is the unwarranted beneficiaries, or unwarranted circumstances. So that means that, the Spanish public broadcasters are going to get a check when Google aggregate their blogs.
In my humble opinion, the beneficiaries of the legal reform are the great daily newspapers editors, because the government wants to ensure the support of the great newspaper groups in a time of political uncertainty. The reason is political. They are lobbying, La Vanguardia, El País, El Mundo, the great groups were lobbying, and the government has accepted to try to implement a Google tax. Let's see if it works or not. If not, we can reform that next week, or next year. Sorry.
Or next week.
Yeah, next week. Yeah. And in the meantime, please don't be our enemies. Treat us well, please.
Is there? How does the extraterritoriality of the internet work here? Supposing Google go offshore. Supposing they switch off Google News in Spain, but they still have Google News in England or Ireland or whatever like that. I mean, people can access the material from there, can't they? So there's another weakness of enforcement.
If it were an economic problem, the solution, in my opinion, is not to reform the Copyright Act, is to apply the tax law, because Google is paying in Ireland. Google is paying their taxes in Ireland because it's cheaper for them. So the question is, if it's an economic question, so let's make them pay using tax law.
But then you get problems about state supporting journalism, which is most big. So if the answer is in the tax law rather than the machine or in copyright law, if the answer is in the tax law, then the government will get a large amount of money from taxation, and that needs to go back to the people who generate the news content which is being parasited. And then you get problems of checks being written by government to newspapers. So you heighten the problems about democratic control in relationship to the free press.
I'm sure all of us are hungry. It's lunchtime. It has been a 4-hour-long session, very rich, very useful in my opinion, very fruitful. Let's hope that this is the beginning of something and not the end of anything. So once again, thank you very much for coming. Those that have come from abroad, from Madrid, of course, Antonio Ruiz has come from Barcelona, and all of them that have agreed to come here. Let's hope we learn a little bit and go with more questions to only that answer. But that was the goal of this seminar. And also many thanks to our research project head, Dr. Escolina, for funding us, for merging with the Ministry of Economy and Innovation, explaining that for sure is not trained to encourage learning at all. Let's say that. Even though all the problem posed by the ministry, the seminar has been very successful. Also, many thanks to Juan Linares, the technical support of the whole thing, and to Laura Perez. Many thanks, and we have some lines for you, and let's talk about copyright or beyond copyright of any other important things of life.
Copyright is not